Hello, we are back for episode 6 of Determined for More podcast in our 6-episode series. So this is our last episode to share some things with you guys as we journey into the topic of conflict resolution and repair. And as we do that, we're really going to be talking about how do we get into conflict? Like, what are some of the things that happen to get us into conflict? And as we've been talking about through the whole series, this is the intersection of, just betrayal issues and sexual integrity issues and where it meets neurodiversity. So we want to kind of jump in. We're just going to dive right in. Last episode, we were talking about empathy and different types of empathy and theory of mind. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to that because that's going to have a lot to do with our conversation today. So do you want me to start?
Yeah,
I'll just kind of start. Okay. So one of the things that we recognized through many years of struggle and truly from the beginning of our relationship is the conflict that we would have. And this conflict might be something seemingly small that would grow really big, really fast. So it was really hard for us to recognize what is going on and why is this conflict rising so fast. And so what we want to do is just give you a little snippet of some of the things that we see now that we can look back and have done work around, and we still together we've done work around it, but we still can get into these dysfunctional cycles or what you may hear of as dances, and it can still happen. Spirals. We called ours the rugby spiral. So looking at that, some of the things that we recognized is one of the biggest things that would happen in conflict is there would be an injury or a hurt to me. That was kind of some of the biggest ones. And so recognizing that there might be something that I have said maybe one time, maybe 5 times, maybe 50 times. And I think Kevin understands what this is and that either something's bothersome to me or something is a true injury to me. And what would happen is I would share that, and very quickly I would be in an emotional state. So I would be, feeling some big emotions coming up for me, and Kevin would be in a logical state. And that was a pretty common theme, probably from...
Still is.
Still is. Probably from month 1, month 2 of dating. And so one of the things that we recognized there was, when I'm in that emotional state, what are some of the things that Kevin could do to help me? And what are some of the things that he can do that would harm the situation? So do you want to pick up there?
I do.
Give some ideas?
Yeah, and I think maybe before we even fully jump into that too, as I think about conflict, and we've talked about an awareness of autism and neurodiversity. We've talked about how it's an empowerment and an awareness for us. It's not an excuse. I think as we talk about conflict, when we talk about getting into conflict, most of the time that conflict comes from a behavior that stems, not an autism characteristic. And so, for instance, my rigidity, which is an autism characteristic of having rigidity, that doesn't usually cause the harm and the damage. It's when I get controlling out of it. It's when I get, say hurtful things through that there's a snappy, harsh, rude. That's when the conflict is created. And so there's a behavior there that can be changed, a behavior that can have action towards it that is different from an autistic trait. And so I think that's an important part of that. And we've talked about that before and dive into that. When it comes to having conflict, though, many times I will find myself maybe feeling misheard or misunderstood, or what I was trying to say maybe didn't come out right and did cause hurt or harm. And you'll say ouch or something like that to express the harm, and I miss the ouch, and I miss the opportunity to connect with empathy, as we've talked about in previous episodes. And I go into, as you were saying, the logic of explaining, that's not what I meant. Here's what I meant. No, this is what I was meaning by, and it becomes very methodical and very kind of, often you will say, rote in how I'm trying to do that. And I want to point out two things to that. One to the neurodiverse person and one to the partner. And I'll start with the partner first, and that is that that often feels like defending, blaming, that you're being criticized for that. And to the neurodiverse partner, we might be saying, well, I'm just trying to explain myself to get you to understand what my brain is saying. The reality is I will never be able to explain in a way for Shauna to understand my brain, nor will she be able to, nor will I ever be able to fully understand her brain. We are wired differently. And so I just need to get off my battle of fighting to get her to understand me and hear the impact of what was said. And that can be really hard for me sometimes.
Yeah. I think what I heard you say was getting off the battle, because when I hear, when I say, ouch, something hurt me, something that you did caused me pain or caused me angst or whatever it is, and then you are trying to be understood, it feels like in those moments, like it gets taken off of what I'm trying to say, because I'm trying to be understood too in that moment, aren't we all? And then it feels like, wait, now it's about you. And sometimes it doesn't feel like your motive is off. I don't know, sometimes too, but a lot of times it's just, yet it's happened. And I just need acknowledgement and understanding of my perspective and not your perspective, not yet, at least. And so it will like change the topic then to what you thought and why you did it and all those things. And I didn't intend to do that. Those are all great, but in that moment, it's really, really hard for me, because then I'm left going, but I don't think you understood me. Like, I don't think you understood, and I'm the one that came with what we might call a grievance, and maybe it's a mild one, maybe it's a moderate one, maybe it's a major one. And so, some of that gets entangled really quickly for us.
Well, and I think on the neurodiverse side, also too, we look so much black and white, and seeing any gray is a struggle for me. And so I will get caught in arguing the black or arguing the white. I think someone had shared with us one time, when we think about conflict and who's responsible for the conflict, right? It's never 50-50. There's always somebody that owns a little more to it, right? But it's also not 100-0 either, right? Yeah. And I think one of the things I know for me and a lot of the guys that I work with, if it's 99.9 and 0.1, we will argue the 0.1, right? And that's I think a common reality with neurodiversity, and that is we can get stuck on that.
Yeah, and making those, instead of taking the majority of the situation or saying, yeah, let's deal with this first so we don't create more injury and disruption to the relationship. So a couple of the things, we'll talk about some tools and some resources. And if you're listening to this and you're in our workshop or you're planning to join our workshop, we will dive deeper into this, because it really is unique to each couple dynamic. Yeah. I tend to be more, I want to resolve it. I want to get to the bottom of it. I want it to be behind us quicker. And for most of our relationship, you've been more avoidant.
Well, that's how you get it behind you quicker, right?
Yeah, just maybe not. Maybe just avoid it, pretend like it's going to go away. Now, I know not every relationship is that way. Sometimes it's opposite. Sometimes the woman might be like, I just want to avoid it. Just let's not resolve this. And the husband might be anxious to resolve something to get back in good graces with one another. So it's not a one size fits all at all. So I think it's important that we look at each unique situation. That's what we're going to do in our workshops. So looking at that and just recognizing what are the dynamics that got us here and what might we need as a couple in that moment, because the reality is we all want to be heard. We all want to be seen. Yeah. We all want to be known. This isn't new information, whether it's neurodiverse relationship or not. Right. I also want to just add really quick, is if we have, breach of trust in our relationship, if those things have been part of our story, that can even exponentially make this harder, because it can look like someone's trying to cover up, or someone's trying to gaslight us, like, oh, I don't remember saying that to you, or I didn't say it that way. And it's not always gaslighting. Sometimes it can be, but that is really around intention. And I think it's important to know the difference of what is the intentionality behind that. And we can gaslight someone. And if you're not familiar with gaslighting, like, look it up. There's a lot of, I think it was the buzzword of 2022 or something like that. But you can look up what that means. But I think there's a lot of intentionality around that. And so I think it's important just that we really look at, what's going on underneath the relationship and how do we respond individually.
Yeah, just to add to that, as we talk about, this course and series that we're working through is really at that intersection of, the sexual betrayal and that side of it. And I just want to, for those that are neurodiverse, I just want to kind of bring this up as awareness. So in order for us to have our life of acting out, or have our life of whatever, the unhealthy behavior was that was going on, we had to lie. We had to deceive. We had to do those things, or we wouldn't have been able to stay there, right?
Get away with it.
And get away with it.
Yeah.
And so now, while we may be in healthy recovery and sobriety, some of those autistic traits that we have, pervasive demand for autonomy and those types of things, can be really triggering for a partner, because they look so close to each other. And so I would encourage you that if your partner feels that there's maybe this kind of flashback, that they're seeing a pattern or seeing a behavior that looks very familiar to them, to when you were acting out or when things weren't safe and stable, just know that's real, and that's a very prime opportunity for you to be able to connect empathetically and to connect and understand where your partner's coming from. The more that we try to defend and explain ourselves, the more it looks like we're defending that, and that there is something wrong.
And it looks, like you said, really similar. Yeah. I just want to say one thing that you said. I just want to clarify this so we make sure that the listeners understand. When you say we had to lie, I know I kind of added in to get away with it. It's not that that lying was okay, but what I think you're saying, that was a mechanism, a very unhealthy mechanism to lie about behaviors, deceptive behaviors. Right. So it's not a have to because of any neurology or anything like that. No, I just want to clarify that for everybody.
To keep the addiction, to keep the unhealthy behavior going.
They're kind of intertwined together. Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify that. But when you think about, going into recognizing your conflict cycle and how do you respond in conflict, some of the things that's important is how are we going to restore that conflict? What's the time frame around that? How fast does that conflict arise? Is it like a 0 to 60, which was a little bit more of our story? Is it this slow, conflict that's over days or weeks? Sometimes it's that because there's we don't want to resolve it. It's too painful to try and resolve it. So I would just encourage you to think about what is that pattern for you with regard to your conflict, so you know what you might need to help restore it or repair it.
Yeah. I know in the workshop in that we talk a little bit about the pain and peace cycle, and we talk about how you can restore with that peace and be able to come alongside and repair in that. But there's other things that have helped us as well too. Do you want to share some of those?
Yeah, I'll share a few. So for us, the conflict cycle happens pretty fast. So we both can kind of fire fast. Some of that can be kind of an anxious state of being at times, but we can both kind of rise really quickly. And so one of the things that is important to us, and you might have heard, a timeout if you've had any marriage work, or a break. What do we do there? And I think it's important to think about how much time you might need. So we think of like 20 minutes if you need 20 minutes first. You might need 2 hours. You might need longer than that. You might need 24 hours. But taking that 20 minutes, because when we're in conflict, if we only take 5 minutes, we are not cooled down by then, usually. Mm-hmm. So take that full 20 minutes, and we'll give you some ideas around kind of what works for us, and you can try them out. But take that 20 minutes. If that doesn't work, then try the 2 hours. I think we need a little bit of a longer break here. Let's come back together. And we think it's helpful to do that for couples, because then you have a time frame to come back to and a destination to come back to. Otherwise, we talked about this, I think, last episode, is then it's kind of, this lingering, well, who's coming back and how? So depending on again, your dynamics, and that would require you just kind of diving in deeper, and where the pain is being caused. We do have something that we call a code word. In fact, we have a few code words, but one that we specifically use when it comes to conflict.
Yeah, and I think the important thing too with that is when the timeout is called and you initiate kind of your break at that point, is that it's honored, and that it's respected, and that it's done in a healthy way. And that's an important part, right? It's the purpose of the timeout is because we're heading on a path that someone is going to get hurt. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of the timeout is to allow, more often, the neurodiverse person to recenter and to balance, and to be able to come back, kind of reset. And with the hope of then not causing further harm in the relationship. Now, I want to kind of share as well for the spouse, for the neurotypical, it may look very different for how someone with neurodiversity kind of expels that energy that's building in them. So, for instance, I know that there were times that I would call a timeout. And maybe I would go out in the yard for 15 minutes and pull weeds or something like that. Or I would go to the garage. And Shauna's version of timeout was much more empath, as we've talked. Mm-hmm. It was much more solitude type. And just because I'm pulling weeds or, moving some boxes in the garage doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about it. That just might be how I'm trying to express this energy that's inside of me, to allow myself to get that out so that it doesn't come out on Shauna. And so it can look different. The important thing is that while I'm moving boxes in the garage, that I am actually thinking about what I need to do to reset myself. It's not a timeout that I'm just going to go shut all this off for 20 minutes and then come back and find myself at that same heightened re-entry point. Yep. It does take work during that 20 minutes to reset myself emotionally to be able to come back at a different place.
I was just going to add that, because I think it's so hard for me when I'm going, and maybe I might go for a walk or a drive or something like that in that initial time, but I'm one that wants to restore it quickly. And so I'm seeing him do a task, and that alerts me of all the times before that he went and did a task and never came back. Mm-hmm. And so that is really, I could say activating, triggering, that can really make more rise up in me of what are you doing and why are you just doing a task? Isn't the relationship important to you? And so I think it's important that you said you might be doing something, but what's important is you're also checking in with your emotional state and what's going on for you. So usually what's helped you more often is when you go and do a self check-in and make sure you're checking in with yourself. Even if you've moved some boxes, pulled some weeds, done something active, energy, exertion, that's great. But then actually took some time to really sit down and slow down enough, because sometimes your anxiety within is really high in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anxiety is a big one. I also think too is that for those of us with neurodiverse, we would love to never have conflict, right? We would love that would be the case. The reality is that
most of the time.
Yeah, the reality is that's not going to be the case. Yeah. And so having a solid plan on how to handle conflict, how to work on repairs, and again, we're just sharing with you some of the things that works for us. This, as Shauna mentioned in the beginning, is a very individual, couple, unique type approach, because what works for Shauna, and I have to be careful when I'm mentoring with guys and I say, well, here's what I might do in that situation, and then they go try it and they come back and go, yeah, that didn't work, because their wife is not Shauna, and so it really does. I just want to kind of say that it does take coupleship work a little bit to understand what it is that works for that repair work and for that during conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that we have done, and we really like to encourage people to consider this, if you go into a heightened state quickly, and this can work for if you both avoid more too, but if that, heightened, 0 to 60 happens really fast, is considering having a code word that gives a little time to slow it down. So like I said, we've had some code words. One of our code words, our current code word, we've changed it through the years a little bit, is Azer, which means helper. And that word really helps us, helps Kevin in that moment. Oftentimes I'm the one calling that code word. And I'm recognizing that he's not hearing what the grievance is or what I'm saying, and really in that logic brain and trying to solve it.
Or I'm still trying to get you to understand my point, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we will call it, and that means for us, what that means is we do call that 20-minute break. That is like no more words are spoken, 20 minutes, and then he comes back. So he pursues me to come back from Azer. So if I'm going to take the effort to call it, which is hard and has been really hard, then he takes that and comes back to me.
So I want to point out a couple of things there that are really important. I don't want our listeners to miss that. So if I call a timeout, it is my responsibility to come back. Okay, so if an individual, one of the partners calls a timeout, it is that person's responsibility to come back. Okay,
a break, timeout,
a break, whatever
like
the word
that.
is. Okay, yeah. When Azer is called, and that's our code word, that's my code word that Kevin needs to check in. And so when Azer is called, Kevin needs to respond to that. So it's not like Shauna calls Azer and that's her calling timeout and she's responsible to come back. That Azer was called for me. Yeah. And I think that's an important.
I think it is. Yeah, because I don't want it all to fall on him, right? Because there are times where I need a break. I'm feeling heightened. Where'd that emotion come from? Why am I so upset with this? Or why do I not want to talk all of a sudden? Like, what's going on for me? And that's my responsibility. I can call a timeout or say, I need a few minutes. Can we come back to this? I'll be back in a few minutes. It's not always that pretty sounding. I'll be back in a few minutes. It might sound like that. But yes, I like that you differentiated between timeout or break and the actual code word that we specifically picked for him. So that's been good for us to really recognize that.
Yeah, and I think that so then when we come back, there's kind of a process for coming back.
Yeah.
So I know in the beginning, I would come back and say, okay, 20 minutes is up. I'm back.
Mm-hmm. And whose responsibility would that come back to?
And then that puts it right on Shauna, right?
Yep.
But that was easier for me. I didn't, in the beginning, I didn't know how to come back. I didn't know what that looked like. And having some of the emotional skills and things like that we've talked about in prior episodes and workshops, how do I put those into play? How do I bring those into a situation like this? And so that's really an important part, and something that we go deeper into in the workshop is really talking about how you make a healthy repair, how we do something we call redos when we have a redo, and then also how ultimately the goal is that through that conflict now we can move to restoration and a resolve to our conflict. And the important part of that is being able to move towards resolve of a conflict doesn't mean that we both agree on the same thing. It just means that on that topic, for that situation, for what it is, we're able to move on.
Yeah. It really does. I mean, it allows for quicker forgiveness. It allows for just like moving through the day, even rather than having this big thing under the rug and we never addressed it and then we threw something else under the rug. And I want to touch on one last thing as we wrap up. But recognizing when we're flooding. So that was when like we have multiple emotions, and this can happen for me too. This doesn't have to be the autistic partner. This can be the non-autistic partner. This can also happen in betrayal trauma if we've had that experience in our story especially. And recognizing what's going on within me, that I need to focus on regulation. So we will talk more about emotional regulation and how to do that in conflict, but that really is ultimately the step apart so that we can recognize and just really see what's going on for ourselves, and then we can come back together hopefully in a better attempt. And sometimes it takes us multiple times. So that,
if at first you don't succeed, try again.
Yeah.
And again.
Maybe for decades, no. But these tools, we hope that it'll give you, just some things to think about earlier. Now you might be really deep into this and you need some actual help in addition to listening to this podcast series. But we thank you for being here. We thank you for listening to this series. If you haven't heard the other episodes, we hope you'll go back and just listen back, because I think there's some things you can really gain that have built up into this episode today. So you can go back as well for that. And if you subscribe, you'll get some information about the workshops coming up. And also it just helps us reach others that are on this journey with us, because we know that we are not alone, having experienced what we have in our story, and more in the book. If you're interested in our story, we're only just giving you little nuggets of information, but Determined for More, the book, is on Amazon and all the online bookstores. So just, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you to the listeners, the feedback that we have gotten, the support, the engagement that has been there is amazing. Thank you for that. We are so grateful that we've been given an opportunity to do this work and to be able to share really just kind of some of those things that have helped us along the journey. And I know for many, many a days, it felt pretty lonely at times. And so we just want to encourage you to just continue. We'd love to have you stop by our website. That's www.livingstonescoaching.com. On there, you'll find some additional resources that are available. You'll also find information on there, too, around some of our services that we offer. We'd love to connect with folks. If you have questions for us, we both do kind of strategy planning calls, so we can get together with you and kind of talk about what next steps might look like for you, either individually or as a couple. And we'd love to just continue to walk this journey out with you. So thank you so much for being a part of this workshop series with us, and stay tuned, hopefully in the future, for more to come.
All right. Thank you, guys. Take
See ya.
care.